So tonight we begin with talking about bad news. And by the way, I didn't really expect you to read all 4 sections and discuss them tonight. So even though it says on the syllabus for next week that it will be wrapped up, and it'll really be useful friends on my part for whatever we have to say about that new, and then we can go drink beer. That's the last thing. So we don't have to get through all that. But as you probably figured out, the title of this course is the title of this book.
Who knows?
You figured that out?
What? Oh my God!
I'm going to pretend to now that you said it.
Yeah.
And in fact, not only it's not an accident, it was intentional on my part.
Wow.
That's what I could see.
Yeah.
What a genius.
As I said a little while ago, I really saved the best for the last because in some ways this is the theory of the subject and the way I think the theory of the subject has been developing. Even starting with Hegel. And of course we looked at Hegel, we looked at Kierkegaard. Badiou doesn't regard per se, but I think the kind of ghost of Kierkegaard is stalking a lot of what he does. The ghost of Kierkegaard also, I think, haunts Lacan. And so, that, following the famous saying of Lenin when he was asked what communism was, he said Soviets plus electrification. You'd say, what is the theory of the subject? It's Hegel plus Lacan. And interesting though, I got the feeling a lot of you were kind of either baffled or bored, probably both, by because of Zizek's rhetorical excesses. But in some ways, even the kind of stuff that Zizek was trying to open up, which had not really been opened up before, at least in the English world, in the particular subject, is kind of given more of a kind of philosophical precision in this particular work. So, this is all about the subject, and he even has some definition for the subject as being. What do you think the subject is? This subject obviously is not a substance. So we've known since Hegel, subject is not a substance. Hegel is about how substance becomes subject. But the subject isn't a starting point, it's an ending point, but it's already in some ways, according to Badiou, in a kind of weird sort of alchemy, which he keeps alluding to throughout what he says. It's already kind of there, but its there-ness you don't recognize until after the event. Now I will say, just as a kind of matter of contextualization, that after this was written, of course, it was written a lot longer before it was translated. And I think one of the reasons it wasn't translated was because of kind of all this sort of stuff, party talk, stuff that would only be of interest to people who had lived in that particular era in France, who had been political activists, and like, what does this have to do with philosophy and stuff? And as goes in America, that Badiou kind of broke ground in this country with his book Manifesto for Philosophy, which it's like Deleuze and Guattari's What is Philosophy? It's like, okay, so this is the latest kind of postmodern, post-structuralist, kind of revision of what postmodern thought is. Though in many respects, I can think this is the book that truly breaks, even in a way that Zizek does with what we might call this sort of archetypal notion of the postmodern. In other words, this is the first true postmodern book, and it was, in a sense, published at the time when the postmodern, as a notion, actually, the notion of the postmodern wouldn't be actually enunciated until by Lyotard in the early 1980s. But even as that was beginning to gain steam and sort of dominate and overshadow all of not only European but Western thought in the 1980s and 1980s, because it's pointing in a whole new direction. And in some ways, that the breakage here with the whole notion of the subject, I guess what I call it, something that postmodernism cannot break out of is what I would call the interpretive subject, the self-interpretive subject. And I won't explain really what I mean by that. I think you could see how even this whole notion of the curatorial subject, the care of oneself, this kind of reflexivity, where in some ways there is this self-discipline and self-formation that is going on, which is always open-ended. That makes it very postmodern in some ways. But there's no open-ended self-formation. Even the very idea of a self-formation itself, a process of self-formation, is not what is happening here. This is not about the subject in the way that we ordinarily understand the subject. That is about, the glorified transcendental me. This is not the subject that comes ultimately is derivative from the subject position of Cartesian reflexivity. This is the subject in the sense which breaks the Cartesian circle, which shatters the Cartesian self-reflexivity. In fact, the very circle of reflexivity itself, and opens up the possibility of the subject as history, the subject as event. So in many ways, Badiou had to write the theory of the subject before he could write being an event. And there's a serious Badiou scholarship out there. Badiou scholarship, if you want to call it that, I hate the notion that we have scholars, like little maggots that are kind of worms burrowing into some great thinker, after his carcass has been spread out all over the world of academic thought and so forth, creating these little wormholes that we all bury into and say, I'm a Deleuzian materialist speculative realist, because, I've got that little piece of meat, that I and my maggot, wormish, I'm sorry.
Sound real?
We just ate all the cupcakes.
Yeah. So far, good child's not on the top of anybody's list.
Somehow I've got what I need to do whatever I'm going to do and so forth, because I hate the evangelical megachurch in which I grew up. So I think that Badiou really, in some ways, allows us to begin to see, for the first time since the demise of Marxism as a world historical movement, or since, in some ways, the eclipse of whatever grand narrative or great vision inflamed at one time the minds of what was called an internationale. And I'm not saying that Badiou's whole look or take or vision of is capable of generating any kind of, even a third internationale in the way that Derrida talks about at the end of Spectres of Marx. I think Lyotard may be right. The end of grand narrative is also the end of internationals. But in the same ways, a kind of internationalist idea of what our position is as caring beings, as moral beings, as revolutionary beings, as beings who are, in a sense, dissatisfied, ticked off, those who are drawn into a sense of crisis, those who want to act upon the sense of crisis. I think it can begin to give us a kind of philosophical scaffolding in the way that the left-wing Hegelians and the thought of the young Marx ultimately did to the first and second international. And so, but I'm not going to say what that is. I have a new book in mind that I'm going to write one of these days. I think the time is right. I'm going to call it on militancy. It'll be a follow-up to my book that's coming out this summer with Columbia. And those of you who have signed up for my political theology course will be reading the course on the force of God, which, you know, in some ways take some of the ideas of Badiou. The idea of what militancy really means, and even what the most radical notion, which Badiou himself is very sensitive to, because he talks about that in his book on St. Paul. What, you know, one time in the history of Christianity was called the church militant, or what Jesus called the kingdom of God. Not that I'm, in a sense, using this as an apology for the church, or I'm trying to sort of revive Christian theology. I'm certainly not trying to rehabilitate somebody like John Milbank or something. Please, no way. But I'm saying this whole notion of what we might call the event that creates a whole new militancy, a force of history that has not been possible before, a sense of a force that brings about the radical new that Badiou is talking about, in the way that Marx understood it, in a way which Marx is still significant and relevant in many respects, but which is not just, belly aching about neoliberalism, which you don't understand whatever it means, which is what we do and call ourselves radicals, which is just a farce. Sorry, that's my political comment. Next time anybody makes some kind of snarky comment about neoliberalism, I'm going to say, you know what the hell you're talking about? And thinking about, then what are you going to do about it? Well, I don't know about it, just throw capitalism. Fine. How? What? What do you mean? What's, where's your historical materialism? Where is the motive force? Where are you situated? Where's your subject position? Giving yourself a subject position within history. Badiou is all about giving itself to you philosophically. What's the matter? That's good. Oh, okay. I thought you were disagreeing. You were shaking your head. You looked dismayed. Maybe it was his anxiety. No. So when Badiou talks, remember he's talking, sort of orthodox French esoteric mathology, which no longer has any real application today. When he talks about the party, think international. Think like a mobilization of some kind of community, a political community, an insurrectionary political community. And like Marx and Engels, he saw early Christianity as being kind of the prototype of that. I'm not going to get into what the theological sort of, there are a lot of people that have written books about it. In fact, there's a guy named David Congdon, who's interestingly with InterVarsity Academic Press, who's written a very interesting article on Badiou and Christianity and militant notions. I think that's in the air. We all want to change things. Marx changed the world in a sense, but you don't change the world without a theory of how change happens. And so this is a theory of change. It's the theory of change that is postmodern because it understands both the sliding signifier and the productive emptiness of the core, like you're talking about, an aesthetic inspiration, but the productivity of the core as an event. So in a sense, there are two terms here that Badiou hasn't really developed in his writing, but will later become the centerpiece. There's being and event. And in some ways, being makes no sense without event. Event is in some ways the predicate of being. Now, Badiou wouldn't say it exactly that way, and I'm using predicate in a loose sense. But I think one of the problems where we have difficulty reading Badiou, or we have a difficulty assimilating this, or even we go back to Lacan, because hopefully you've read enough of this to see that that the Lacanian, you know, aroma is so strong in reading that. I mean, this is political Lacanianism at its finest. Political Lacanianism that still preserves the heritage of Marxism and preserves really what we might call the basis of revolutionary theory. One of the things I think that Badiou notes, and again, you know, I'm not going to go, you know, give a kind of background lecture on what Marxism is all about. I think you also idea of Marxism. I know a number of you are taking a course on Marxism this year. Excuse me, this quarter. But you know, one of the perennial aporias or issues in the study of Marxism is what do we do with this term communism? You know, it's not apparent. What do we do with such ideas as the withering away of the state? Or what is the role of the state and so forth? You mentioned Althusser, you know. One of Althusser's last you know, major books was on the state and the state apparatus and the way the state enforces the ideology of the state apparatus and so forth, which this is your issue of the state as a subject. The state engenders a kind of pseudo-subjectivity.
Mhm.
A pseudo-subjectivity that becomes, in many ways, the matrix for what, you know, Marxist movement called class consciousness, the achievement of class consciousness. What it does is it makes subjects out of those who were previously subjugated, or those who become through insurrectionary act. But we don't mean insurrection. Insurrection is not a riot, though a riot can be in some ways a symptomatology of insurrection. And again, you know, we have to understand the whole notion of insurrection here, which Badiou does. If you read his Logics of Worlds, insurrection, resurrection become two key terms. Both are derived from the Latin word from which we get the English surge, is that kind of force of history. So subject, force, event, scission. These are in many ways more attributions of what we call being. The being not in the metaphysical way. Being understood in a whole new post metaphysical or post metaphysical post-modern matter. You know, right. I think one of the most interesting propositions, which I knew, and I even baffled Nick with that in my office this afternoon. Anybody have a marker by any chance?
Yeah. I left mine up there. I don't know what happened to it,
It was stolen, I think.
I guess.
Markers. I'm sorry, but you know, if you're going to talk about that, you have to get some formalisms on the board here. How about
Try
if I?
final try.
No, this,
Mike.
Yeah, Jerry's still in.
Might be out. Ain't no Samantha Carl. Sorry.
by the way, we did this when I was a kid. I don't know. This might have been a former generation. We had a little ritual. You finish your apple, you'd say apple core, and you would say, you know that? Anyone know that you're Baltimore now?
Exactly, yes.
You remember this?
No, but we were just AppCore, Baltimore, and then insurrection because that's what the
Right. It's sort of like that. You say, who's your friend? And then you all choose your friend. Who's my friend? Your friend. Apple Core, Baltimore, who's your friend? And you will point to somebody. Who's my friend?
That's pretty spry.
Next time.
Are you anxious yet, Tom?
So, all right. So,
By the way, this is the moving ghostly figure. You know, this is the figuration in the void. It's not 1 plus 1 equals 2, but 1. That really bothers you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the count. It's like, yeah, that whole section.
Count is 1, yeah. It really bothers you. Why does it bother you so much?
Because it's just, I have such a tenuous grasp on general mathematics to begin with, and then he starts like inserting his own functions into it without even further explanation. So,
Did anybody get that part, or didn't? I mean, it wasn't so explicit in here, but it's in. I tell you what, you go online, the European Graduate School, you know, where he gives lectures. There's a very good lecture on him by Badu, recent lecture, where he kind of lays this all out. And so, well, what do you think that means? Because we have 1, 2, 3, on and on and on, and 5 and 6. But the reason 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, which doesn't mean all that algebra. You know, he's always going on about algebraic formulation. But all these are possible according to Cantor and set theory because we have this funny little round that looks like a pregnant Cora we call 0. So what do we do with 0? You know, the Romans didn't have a 0. You know, it was the Indians and what in Middle Ages that came up with 0. You know, that became sort of revolution of mathematics, you know, from which we get set theory. Basically, numericity, or what in mathematics is called cardinality, you know, the sequence of enumeration, which is potentially infinite. The sequence of numeration always takes place in the void that is 0, because in some ways preceding it, not underlying it in a substantial way, but that which in sense engenders it, that gives rise to it, becomes a condition of it, choose that term, is null. Okay, so you may say, what is the set of sets? By which letter the idea of the forms? It's the mathesis. It's the formal action of one signifier from another signifier. This is the basis of logic. That's what we mean by the mathesis. That mathesis, at its level of pure formality, is ironically both abstract and concrete at the same time. You know, because if I say, here is a set of glasses, what do I mean by that? First of all, I use the word set, right? 2 within this, you know, 2, because I have 2 eyes, okay? So the minute you say 1, the minute you use phenomenological language, the minute you present this, you don't so much have an antithesis, you have, according to Badu, a split, a scission, a fact that there is a division, not an antithesis, you know? I don't know, what do you call these things? You just call them glasses, right? But still in the plural.
Which bit?
So, huh? Is there a word for this part of it?
Lens?
A lens, yeah. I think. The fact that to have a set of glasses, I have to have 2 lenses, means that there's a scission taking place within the very set itself. Okay? So I had to enumerate in order to enunciate. what something is in terms of its set. And you say, is the set that underlies all set. It's what Cantor called the null set. And Cantor, what little I know about mathematics, Cantor's theorem or demonstration was to show that this null set and the possibility of all finite cardinal enumerations from this null set that makes mathematics as a whole possible. Okay, so this may seem really esoteric to us. Why don't we just get why mathematics? When we get down to words, because and even when we like words, we love the sort of pure. So the thing is, why do we have stuff like here? In some ways, it's a lot worse than Lacan. There's that section where it's got like all this on page 174. Why do we have all this crap? I'm gonna have to be honest, I haven't read it. I don't care about it. I skipped over, but most philosophers do. But still, I think and they're really gonna skip over it. Is like, I never took a course in it, so, and it's not necessary to teach this class because you don't know what he's talking about either. So why should I know? If I try to explain it to you and put it on the board, you would be bored wide. The last math course I took in college, which was a course in integral calculus, my second year, my sophomore year, before my girlfriend dumped me, and I went into absolute despair and became a philosophy major, and the rest is history. I suffered through a math professor who would be said on the board. So can you imagine if I were to come into you and say, I would say, hello, class. Today, we will talk about that. So you did, Mark. So,
No.
I guess you really love just formalisms. But, I'm going to take you to the Mark. So anyway, that was that and Kierkegaard and beer and pizza, and my girlfriend dumping me sort of with my own decision in life. Plus, those then when men outnumbered women on campus, the other way around. You could never get a date when you were a sophomore. So, true. Affected a whole generation. So anyway, so why do we have this kind of formalism? Because we value formalism. Because in some ways, somehow we think we're at the heart of ontology. And Badiou wants to recognize and honor that. We're at the heart of ontology when we talk about numbers. That was the great Pythagorean insight, so much that Pythagoras made a religious cult of numbers. I mean, numbers were mystical. We still have this kind of mystical imagination that is still preserved in some of the discourse of modernist art, particularly the work of Kandinsky and the whole, idea of pure abstractionism with color, line, and form and primary colors and so forth, to somehow get back to those primal formalisms of the cosmos, and somehow to be able to come up with a symbolic language of those primal formalisms of the cosmos. We're getting into the very ontology. So the issue here is, isn't philosophy ultimately about ontology? Isn't philosophy about, as Aristotle said, being in some ways, isn't the history of philosophy is really a kind of, better way of talking about what is really primal to all thought itself, which is being qua being, I mean, isn't that what philosophers want to do? Isn't that why we love predicative logic? Even why is it we like to think in terms of syllogistic structures? But what if the syllogism itself? What if the P, therefore Q? What if the if P, then Q? what if the cue itself, in a sense, were a radical disruption, or use Heideggerian language, what if it was not a fall? In a sense, what if inference itself were not equivalent to eating the forbidden fruit? You know, and one of the serpent, who of course, as I said, was the first analytic philosopher, who basically said, did God really say this or that? You know, did God really say that? Maybe God meant by this. And, yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm not sure what God really meant when He said, "Don't eat that forbidden fruit." And so forth. And go ahead, and eat. You know, right? I've been convinced. You know, logic. And you know, because it says that you will die. Well, our eyes were open, but when their eyes were open, what do they experience? Shame, anxiety. It's like, oh shit, hide. They run and hide from whatever had been this kind of voice, the voice of being, and now it becomes the pointing finger. It becomes the transcendental signifier. It becomes the master signifier. It becomes lang or language. That's what happens in Eden. They're still in Eden. They haven't been expelled yet, but it's like it's anxiety. Ontology, as Heidegger understood pretty much in Being and Time, ontology is really not a solution to anything, including the human condition. Ontology is the zone of primal anxiety. So, when we're alone, so to speak, what happens? Well, we run and hide. Or if there's nowhere to hide, what do we want to do? We go on the move. We become historical, which is exactly what the post-Edenic condition is. And we become post-Edenic beings, we become historical beings. We become beings who in some ways are always, to use the term from the Middle Ages, we become homo viator. Humanity on the way, humanity in transition, in media res. But also there is this restlessness that is correlative with that particular anxiety. And at the same time, we're always on the go. This is why Badiou has a marvelous aphorism, I think it's section 3. Maybe it's the beginning of section 5. Define it and so forth. We said victory belongs to those who are always having to think of it. Means we're thinking within his history, means we're thinking in the context of not what is calculable or predictable or manageable, but what is incalculable and unmanageable and chaotic. Which is the thematism of the historical. Because the historical is always that. It's
Are they howling?
Yes.
the coyotes. Are those people?
People may be a loose term. But yes.
It's very strange. Well, it's good background. What I'm talking about. You can not only hear coyotes here in the middle of Denver, you can actually meet them if you go out your door. It's happened to me twice in the last 3 years.
You can kill them without a permit too.
You
You can kill them without a permit.
can't kill them?
I don't know about in the city of Denver, but like in
I don't think so. No,
Yeah.
I don't think not in Denver. You can kill bunnies. You can't kill bunnies. because that's where they hide from the coyotes. Anyway, so that's philosophically, we always value this thing called contingency. Contingency is sort of being the opposite of necessity. But what they do, the whole insurrectionary dialectic, the whole theory of the subject, which is at the same time the theory of the revolution, it requires, in some ways, as its initial set of conditions, what we wrongly regard as chaos. Because without what we regard as chaos, the event is not possible. Now, Deleuze, who was Badiou's teacher, to whom he had this kind of, that's what really makes revolution. Revolution has nothing to do, ultimately, from a Badiouian analysis of violence. You can have bloodless revolutions. You can have coups d'etats, that are truly revolutionary in a certain sense. We can give numerous historical examples, but it's in some way it's this crystallization of the subject where the lack, where he says every subject stands at the crossing between a lack of being, destruction, a repetition, and an interruption, a placement, and an excess. It's this element of excess, or an excess of force, or what can be called a force of excess, where the excess itself brings about losing also. But I don't care. I'm a new materialist. I read Deleuze. 251. Okay. Well, since we're over in this section, let's look.
Actually, the last line of that, he says, it's in italics, to put into consistency the haste of the cause. And he says, therein lies the whole enigma of the subject.
Right. And the cause here, he's not talking about cause, he's talking about a cause like a political cause or so forth. Let's look over in the following chapter, April 10th, 1978. This is a very interesting, and I think in many respects key, really talking about the quality, he says the qualitative function of the supposed knucklehead. I like that. Force, force returns to the scene, neighborhoods and subjectivizing it. Four concepts, two times, two modes. So here he's bringing together a lot of these different, sort of elements in what we might call the axiomatics of both force and insurrection. That is, first of all, you have decision, you have the displacement, you have the splitting, and you have the enumeration, the one as two. Okay, and it's this moment of the multiple. This is the kind of language he talks a lot about, particularly in manifesto philosophy. It's this moment of multiple and multiplication, inescapable. And to be, and in some ways, I think this is a much better rendering of what Deleuze, I don't know, some of Deleuze, some of you haven't, really was getting at with this whole notion of univocity. I think Deleuze is the first one, that Badiou is the first one in some ways to understand the dynamic element of originary non-identity. What is it? Okay. Now, when I read this, I can't help thinking of Fate of Man. Because what he says is basically the subject is a heterogeneous, and the subject, remember, is not, when he pulls it out, he pulls the other team offside. He doesn't hurry because he takes out the clock. But it's this hurrying has not to do with moving fast. Hurrying has a sense to do that, a sense that the possibilities of the coming event, the event that cannot be anticipated, cannot be calculated, because it's here before we know it. Now, if you think about it, in the Christian eschatology, nobody knows when the Son of Man is coming about,
because the Son of Man may come like a thief in the night. So there's this kind of unanticipatory eventful quality, to our experience, and particular trajectories of history that we can only look back and say we can't explain it. We can't, a causal account of it. We can't say, well, sure, I knew it was going to happen. You didn't know it was going to happen. It's Talib's Black Swan. It's Thomas Kuhn's Anomaly. It's that incalculable intervention, which is not a conscious intervention because it has no manageable potential, but it's this intervention, or let's say it's this dynamic whole within whole, WHOLE. But it's this going in different directions. It's not what we predicted. It's this, again, the whole Greek atomistic concept of the swerve, the Kleeneman that he talks a lot about. It's an interesting. It's something there's this incalculable genius identity, but it's a temporalization of identity that has to do with the fact that whatever I am, from whatever subject position I'm thinking, it doesn't really matter because that subject position is going to be swept away by the torrent of temporalization and time, and that being, in a sense, part of that wave is what we would call the event, and a mass scale we would call history. So Lenin didn't, Lenin was caught up almost like a tornado in what happened in 1917. But you heard the phrase seize the moment, seize the day, that you to be able to seize, to be able to act. And this is why he says that he's talking about all this formalization is necessary, is what we might call the layer of algebra, the calculus. The calculus is like planning. So you can think of something that's so obviously stupid and simple as a budget. If you really want to manage your finances, you have to have a monthly or a weekly budget. But your budget, you can never live to your budget. Stuff happens. And you say, oh my God, like I overspent. I just got a notice from the bank that I'm overdrawn. How did that happen? That sort of thing. So you have to decide. You have to act. So in some ways, you're not reacting. You are acting upon. And you say, well, I'll have to change this budget. I do keep a budget. I do it all the time. I do Excel spreadsheets once a month. A program that's in my bank account that sort of tells you automatically what you're spending, so forth, as long as you set up the account setup. But it's still, it's that doesn't make it reactive. What it makes it is practical. The formalization of the subject that she insisted on serving Sushi. The moment of concrete realization we call expenditure, which may be excess. It may be that we got an unexpected windfall, or we in a sense overspent. But it's that instantiation of excess that makes the formalization of the budget real. Yes.
Under hashtag full communism, will there be budgetary spreadsheets?
Questions?
Won't be any more.
Sure, right.
Okay.
The question is if we'll get rid of hashtags.
Yeah, that's a better question.
And in the kingdom of heaven, every when a detective is looking for a motive in a crime. So obviously the detective didn't predict the crime, you know.
Well, actually, it's funny that you mentioned the kingdom,
This has something to do with Pentecostal theology.
the kingdom of heaven. No, not exactly. I don't know if I'm thinking too literally in your metaphor of thinking eschatologically the anticipation. But when it comes to subject formation, and I'm going off of his line on 254, the subjective calculation, in which case there is neither anticipation nor retroaction. Is the anticipation of the eschaton the metaphor, or is it a kind of subjectification that is more akin to Paul on the road to Damascus, where it seemingly comes from nowhere but undoes him and he goes blind? And and a kind of subjectivity is formed, because in one sense there's anticipation. Right, I can make it Pentecostal actually. We can be in the upper room tarrying in Acts chapter 2, waiting for the promise when the Holy
Just break here and then come back.
That's, so I misspoke.
Excuse me.
Please be a bold counsel.
This is like, these are real promises.
You know, prior to what he calls the apocalypse, you know, the vision, which wasn't just a vision, it was just like you say, he went blind, so his light or his voice, you know, in some ways he becomes full of the soul. That definitely fits, you know, the Bedouin model of the event. But in some ways now the lack is revealed in the excess. Right. But before it was a formalization that's facing the
But now you can go to
But it
that
says that the kingdom isn't
Voodoo Donuts and be hip
It's not like
and eat
it's
donuts
Adam.
and pay
But
$7
it
for a
depends
donut
who
with
you're
bacon
with.
on it.
If you're with people who food fascists, they're gonna say
It's just a part of it.
voodoo, that's cool, donuts, no.
No, right.
Oh, yeah, it's so,
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, even it's another avenue.
A response. You know, we tend to think of action and response. It's a reactivity. Like, well, you do this. This lecture he gave at EGS, and it's a very good example. Do it. He says we live in an age of reactivity. So there's what he calls reactive classicism and reactive romanticism. And reactive classicism is basically, well, he doesn't mention it by name. I understand that he absolutely detests Laurel, but you know, Laurel's what becomes the basis for speculative realism and so forth. You know, in some ways, I think it's a sort of dig at like and Mel Sue for that matter. You know, finitude. You know, the whole parameters of finitude, the philosophy of finitude, not in a Heideggerian way where there's this kind of openness and excess and this being towards death, but in some ways where yours is just in some ways this pure limitation. So he calls that reactive. He's this part of this sort of false dialectic, which isn't really a dialectic at all. It's not an aporia. It's just a, you know, it's just a neurotic loop. You know, it's like, well, you know, I'm oppressed, you know, so, you know, I'm gonna, you know, go out and get stoned as long as it's illegal to get stoned in this state. But if it's, by the way, just for your information, you know, the Texas legislature yesterday passed, they're gonna, the first step toward legalizing pot. What will happen in Colorado when they legalize pot in Texas? Yeah. So,
Like full legalization or like medical?
well, yeah, medical.
That's the first step, slippery slope.
Indeed.
That's what I did. That's what I did. But anyway, that's beside the point. So I mean, it's like, You know, if it's legal, I don't care, you know, I'll just find something that's illegal and talk about it, you know.
But you're distinguishing between like reacting and then, but deciding the undecidable. Because I said, don't you have to decide? And he said, well, no, don't confuse, it's not about reacting.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between deciding and reacting?
Well, if, you know, the famous line on a Harley that I saw parked years ago in front of Biker Bar, I guess we don't talk jokingly about biker bars after this weekend, but it said, if you touch my bike, I'll.
What did it say?
You touch my bike, I break your face. You know, and that's reactive, right? It's like if then, you know, or you know, you messed me up, I'm gonna mess with you.
And it's not quite reasons.
Or
causes.
you or share this with me.
Share with you?
I might put it
On your wall.
timeline.
Okay, we'll do.
I'll put it on this time.
Yeah. Oh, I have to get up. Carl.
Agency as opposed to just.
And where there's agency, there's re-agency too. But, you know, the subjectivization or subjectification is not agency, you know, because, you know, there is this moment of total novelty and uniqueness in subjectification. And then what makes it that moment of total uniqueness and novelty is lack. It's the excess of lack. It's the excess within lack. Sound familiar? Okay, next break or continue.
It's the squareness of the circle. It's the unmarriedness. It's the marriedness of the bachelor.
I'm sorry to get the
Jared,
word
you're not amused.
I said, well, I was just, it's the squareness of the circle. It's the marriedness of the bachelor.
Yeah. We are fickle.
I got to already see that. That was the thought.
And then my friend is already.
I'd save up for this man. I'd save up a lot of money for this man.
I would too.
I wouldn't pay to think.
Yep.
Preston Spring.
Who's that?
I know, I don't know much about him, but I've heard him.
I know about it.
I've
Okay.
heard him.
Oh my gosh, you follow me now.
Not that
Yay.
you've seen it.
I know. Wow, quick
Just
notifications.
We were
Yeah.
hoping we couldn't believe that there wasn't a Kimpton hotel.
Oh, what?
A Kimpton hotel.
What's a Kimpton?
Kimpton is a chain of like boutique hotels.
Is it
They're
kind of
like in different cities.
like Ace Hotel?
There's one in Monaco. downtown.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I see. You like Badoo?
And
Did
the
you
one
hate it
in-
before you didn't understand it or because it was?
And we missed it every time. Every from 5 to 6.
I-
there was a company.
I feel like you
As
have
of yesterday,
problem
I
with
have
that.
like-
Like I feel like if he sees the word
We're all
social
missing
now,
every single.
Yes, did I not answer you?
Yeah, you did, but I don't get it.
Well, you're at least on the process.
I'm gonna keep trying to get it.
Why don't you just write a paper on a subject and try to explain it? I mean, you know, I'm not expecting any kind of great creative breakthroughs on it.
Thank you.
You know, I'm trying to just make
What's that?
some sense in your own terms. You know,
So-
whatever the topic is you're doing.
Cut from the same file.
But, you know, have an interesting twist. This is a little more
I've got
advanced.
a
than just
pretty
a-
interesting one. But I have an idea for this, and I was thinking about while we were talking,
I've had writers block off.
which is I'm gonna
With what?
write on the
I've had
collective
writers
subject
block off for it.
and
I
take
don't know how
the
interesting
most
it is.
heinous writing of Hegel of all time.
Well, you know,
The
I think if you got
writing of
writer's
Philosophy,
block,
right?
you just
Yeah, it's kind of the state.
just
I'm gonna
unblock
use the state
Well, I went
as
and
a
got a
metaphor for the
dictation
collective,
device.
like revolutionary
So I could-
subject.
That's a good way.
Talk
It's
it
very
out.
lacanian. You just start
Well,
I'm saying
They also call it coloring on theology.
No, I'm doing everything.
It's one guy I don't
You
understand.
know, yeah.
Correcting myself.
Fuck it up.
They're all the J-
Seriously.
Like,
I know you're right. It's
Oh,
on
yeah.
all right. Can we do our?
Yeah,
It's gonna be a wall.
Right, I like.
He's got glasses.
So a lot of,
Comments are open images.
I was probably going to do some.
There.
Yep.
That should-
So, David, some of
They say dogs,
But it's gonna be
are
somewhere
much more
around.
discursive.
I'm gonna try and stay, you know.
They can process, they can't just say it.
The bad deal.
Other
Well,
it's not.
even these French people don't ever want to be Fidelis to anybody, you know, but, yeah.
More of the fidelity to Hegel.
What kind of dog is he?
That's
Oh,
about,
she's a
but on the.
black.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
that's, I'm gonna be very explicit about not being
pretty.
Fidelis to Hegel, but using that
Sort of
idea
like
because there's a
Square is
universal,
circle.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna argue that.
An amphibious dog.
She's
in terms of
she's
the
a
state,
rescue
but
that
actually in terms of
rescued
freedom
me
of
about
right.
a year ago.
The state doesn't actually represent the collective.
Retired, sort of.
Because he thinks that, like, you have particular and
So now
universal.
She's got a professional resume though.
And that's within every
She
person.
wants to be served.
And that's why you should have this insane regimented state, you know, where it's like they control everything you do. But you also have like an investment in the state as well, you know. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it'll be an interesting one at least. But I'm definitely not gonna say that that was Hegel's argument by any stretch.
Jeff, when you brought up agency, even the agent is a subject at some point. Because when I go to pick up, when I'm at a party, say for a bar, when I go to pick up the drink, but in my mind I've said, no, I don't want the drink. Desire, rationality, the logos is not matching up, yet I still take the drink. Acts of lack of will, you're still finding the other, the not agents. There's still, within analytic philosophy, you still need those events to be known as agency, to make a knowledge of an agent, an agency of agency. If that makes sense.
But then you're thinking in terms of like reactive should be literally reactive, like, right? Something like that, like cause and effect.
Let's go.
I feel like if I'm getting paid by someone, I can wear a brand. I guess a band is like,
Seriously, that's why.
I got my heat from last year.
Well, you also
The way that,
support the
like,
band too, though. Like usually, like
they're like indie bands, or whatever. It's like legitimately indie, not like indie.
Then you lose desire, though there's plenty of.
Or like
On
very
the
small, like,
meantime.
Yeah, but
San
otherwise, I'm
Diego.
Yeah,
San Diego Convention Center.
Oh, as far as like the
I know,
music,
like, I
well, the only way I support is like going and seeing it,
last year.
buying a ticket.
This is so.
They're trying to figure out why the hell these
I can't-
paper.
like,
From a
you're
guy
in
a
the
year ago.
What?
Because I tell you what, I know right in the hotel room when I was. That and the whole ass
Fucking good.
tote bag.
But he's like
Well, it was
only costs like $30 for a ticket, $50 for
Where's
a
that
ticket. I refuse to pay more than
Like,
that.
Get it right.
It's like
It looks like
I
I got my.
know that.
somebody writes about it.
It's not like it's like-
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it could happen.
It depends. I mean, some of it's 50, but I think like worked into that a lot of times. It's like
They are
the bar
old.
too.
Um,
Yeah, it's like
There's
It's
intimate
more
more
for
for
them.
like we go.
most of what I do in Denver's
Like I have a lot of
$10
colleagues that go
stuff,
there,
like,
you know, within
all
my
the dead bars.
I first when I went, I was
That's
still
all
a
I'll
master's
say.
student.
I feel like it's such a
Lower
fucking-
side was the only
even
one.
then, a lot of-
First one was invented.
Some people like Tinga and just
I
like.
lie.
So
Rage.
Right. Yeah.
Just
So he's really
first semester
interesting.
invented, I was in the doctoral program, but I had
So all my
accepted
Yeah, the American
Can't
Association,
imagine
which makes it
being
easy.
on
That's fun.
I was just like-
And even some of the older people that like.
Well, so
I
in.
mean, that's
He's got
how I
like,
think
he's
it
got like
is.
bros he hangs out with.
It's like high school. Yeah.
Because there's the big group.
It was just such a shock. 'Cause otherwise, I don't know if I would have been able to.
Something, religion group, you know, like those were the kind of groups.
I know, I said that in my
sessions.
I was like, what?
Yeah,
like,
I like
Yeah.
Not too much.
Unequal kids today.
Yeah, and then he had another book about died.
Yeah.
Kind of.
It's an SBL.
Goes.
No. Well, maybe, but it's the,
I thought about that one, but I didn't know it eaten the other
So, like,
half.
he does like mic
It's
drops.
got a weird germs.
Yeah.
You were the
I like it.
We might as well go for it.
German, I love German. I do.
You look far more desirous of it.
But he was like, yeah, from Sartre to me and Toulouse. And I think he even said some, like, to a, not quite a traveler, like a travel agent, but like a government official. Like, check it out. Like, this is a French export. French philosophy from Sartre to me. Like, this
That's
is.
true. It has been.
Yeah, I don't, but
I
I
mean, you know, when I was in graduate
He
school,
walks up to him and there's like this.
the note, when you say you were talking about French philosophy, the only person,
Yeah, exactly.
the only person you would read would be Descartes and Sartre. And, you know, and Sartre was considered interesting, but Mr. Culver, do you have something you would like to share with the rest of the class?
no, because it's too embarrassing. So I'll just say thanks for the Twinkie, Carl.
Well, kind of esoteric, you read him like, you know, maybe you would read Russian philosophy. And, yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, what, of course, what gave French philosophy its cachet in America was the, you know, the translation. I mean, the fact, I mean, that makes a big difference. You have a government that will translate your work, the works of your, what's produced.
Oh my God.
They don't have that in the French ministry of culture. And, you know, but Derrida, you know, was sort of a showman, kind of entrepreneur, and, you know, he actually came and lived with us. He dwelt among us. You know.
I saw him like,
You know, he was, yeah. You know,
Jacques Derrida?
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
I know, I was.
Can I touch you?
well, I
That's
just
what
went
he
up
said.
to that. I shook hands and had a private conversation.
Oh, screw you. Can I touch you?
Style or method, you know, Lacan gave seminars, Benji was giving seminars. Wish I could do that. You know, Americans just patience with that, or the attention span. You know, to
Wait, what would that mean? You would, I mean, seriously, you would just, to Anselm Men, and I remember he picked a fight.
Was this actually a seminar or did you just write it like it?
No, it really was. No, it was. Well, let's go. It says every subject stands at the crossing between a lack of meaning and a destruction, a repetition and an interruption, a placement and an excess, or between discord and coyote sounds in an academic environment. This must be a you know, find your inner manhood hell or something.
Wild at heart.
Right. So what do you think he means by this sentence? He's one to hell too, I think. Actually, at my place in Oklahoma a few years back, because it's interesting that all my neighbors are doctors. Doctors or airline pilots, and my actual next door neighbor is a Jungian psychologist, a certified Jungian psychologist, former head of I think the U.S. Jung Society and so forth. We have interesting conversations. It's a kind of weird subdivision in Oklahoma, but anyway, so there was quite a little consternation a few years ago, sort of, you know, underlying uniqueness of French philosophy from Descartes onward, in the sense that you have this interplay of being and nothingness. You might say this sort of subtle play of the force of being and nothingness. So that's the one interesting thing. There's a takeaway from particularly subject where I think Zizek really understands that Cartesianism is not.
What could go wrong? My clients. Let's just get you guys together.
Do you ever just say to your kids, let's just stop and let's just howl?
I tell them to stop howling. Yeah.
Be a bad press, probably.
All right, I'll read this again.
Yeah.
Every subject stands at the crossing between a lack of being and a destruction, a repetition and a placement. So, what could that possibly mean?
So I'll start because then I won't have anything else to say. I heard lack.
Yeah,
I heard
they do have
repetition.
their estimate.
Yeah, repetition I heard to lose. And then actually I don't know if placement is like somebody else that I don't know.
No, that's better.
Okay.
Fractability or fungibility, even to a certain extent. There's this quality of the subject that, in a sense, exposes it for the self-deception it is. And even Descartes recognized, such a position in meditations when he had to call it God to get rid of the evil demon, whether it was really bedeviling after he'd already said the subject. And so it's that fractionability, that evanescent quality of the subject, meaning that it's always on the way to oblivion, that it has this kind of disappearing act to it. This disappearing, not mutilated, and no subject, which is not subjective. The operations of the splice, we know what that means, right? Placement, which is in itself a scission, the one, implies two. Metaphors and metonymies, it's very Lacanian, I'm talking about. Lacanian is this whole theory of discourse, where discourse unfolds,
They caught the rabbit.
Is what Lacan calls the subject of enunciation. The subject of enunciation, in some ways, it was, again, somebody mentioned James Joyce last hour. Joyce's history is this juggernaut in which we're caught up, like an asteroid hitting the Earth, or like flood of the magnitude of Noah's time, and so forth. And we always look at the subject as that. And again, we might call this as the kind of heroic existential view of the subject. It's the subject which is that which stands for itself against everything that seeks to annihilate it. Pascal's famous line in the Pensées, qualities to it. Does a place have potentialities to it? For the last 4 days, this is a project unrelated to this course, I've been reading the literature on what's called placemaking, which is sort of like philosophical community organizing, where you're trying to, in a sense, transform or come up with a theory for the truth. I mean, it's a rambling kind of lecture, but it'll help you understand from his point of view what he means by the 1 and 2 and about the null set and that sort of thing, and why it's important. But we think we have truth, but in fact they don't reveal truth, because what they reveal is the impossible, the impossibility of truth, because what they reveal is the void. You go back to the principle I was talking about, last hour. You can't have numbers without zero.
Well, it just occurs to me that we haven't been talking about language that much tonight. And I was thinking about number and like the relationship between number and language.
And it's true. We haven't been talking about it because Badiou wants to go beyond.
And numbers
Linguistic
kind of a way, like numbers kind of an ambiguous, like the relationship between number and language. I mean, at least in like metaphysics of number,
But I mean, the linguistic turn, which, we see with Wittgenstein, implies all we got is language. This literature, the very milieu that is in place now becomes this kind of vibrant, set of signifying potentials that you did before. Again, this is very much, like Nick is talking about core and so forth. So core one, as Derrida talks about place as having these core capabilities. So we have to understand it's what I can't remember the name of the German philosopher called milieu. So in some ways, place is always a creative milieu. It's where there is always this activity of excess that's going on. This activity is of excess, the Democritean swerve. It's in this twist, where things that seem to be in a straight line, but they swerve. They have the clinamen. They, and that's where formation takes place. That's where, that's where the real now becomes discernible in some particular way. So, I mean, the problem with language, and I mean, Badiou is trying to break out of what Jameson calls the prison house of language.
And is that
maybe you'll hang out at an Irish pub and take a few shots. I don't know what you do after class, but
I do that when I come home with my kids.
yeah. And, maybe you have all sorts of cheers, like friends you see until midnight, and so forth. So that's all part of your kind of placemaking too, as well. The ambiguity and the kind of intractability of natural language that Wittgenstein try to solve and so forth. But the whole linguistic term was an effort to say, well, basically, if we want to somehow be able to know it or say we know it, we have to be able to say it. And the more we can somehow explore all the possibilities of saying, if somehow we can dispose every discursive, or you might say semiotic pathway that language can take, then somehow we've exhausted the possibilities of being. I think there's, even in structuralism, and to a certain degree in post-structuralism, but not as much. I think you find it more in figures like Foucault, in power, knowledge, discourse, that kind of triad. You find in Foucault this sort of supposition, that somehow if we can speak, when the decision, which is when you have this cleavage, when you have this break, what I call a fall, when you have this subject is disclosed and so forth. But Badiou is not interested in people on the couch. He wants to, in a sense, this puts the state on the couch, and once the state is on the couch, in some ways it starts to, the famous line out of Bob Dylan's from the 60s, which you wrote at a time of revolution and great change. Something's happening here that you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? I mean, that's in some ways, if there's any kind of poetic, expression for this sense of displacement, it's that particular.
This has probably been my favorite reading so far, because it's really what I'm interested in, which is trying to find some place for I guess for things that kind of hit the road, for not to just be in your head. Like Badiou is interested in that, and so when it comes, I'm just trying to understand, how does this apply in the real world? Like, I know a lot of the background of it, and actually a lot of it reminds me of stuff that I've read in leftist groups and stuff like that. And this, especially the experience of dealing with circular firing squads and all that stuff that he talks about, which he says is a natural part of trying to develop the subject or whatever. But what I'm interested in is, where, because he says at the beginning,
Can be a subject. It will be a subject.
Well, as I said,
Or at least a pseudo subject.
right, it'd be, good fashion to make that claim.
How many times have you been called a fascist this quarter?
I've been called a fascist so much this quarter, and I'm going to prove all of my detractors wrong.
Yeah, I'm gonna have you and Mike mud wrestle.
let's do it.
I'm not a fascist. No, that was the only thing I just wondered what you were talking about.
You just
Because I caught the whole thing that you were saying. I just
It was like,
missed the name.
I could have said sex and you were.
Yeah, basically, like staying on the couch, sex. Those are the two things that get my
Sex.
Carry
So what do you think of this? I mean, is this kind of weird or crazy? I mean, to me, in some ways, it makes kind of eminent intuitive sense in terms of if we're going to do philosophy, we're going to talk about being, we're talking about the nature of things. That's, I mean, Marx's famous, famous line about, heretofore philosophy is only, his thesis on Feuerbach, heretofore philosophy has always interpreted the world. The point is to change it. What is the question is? Marx didn't give an algorithm for change. In fact, one could say, and that's why he had to write Das Kapital, or Capital. He had to write Capital because in some ways that, he didn't use all the kind of crazy mathematization that goes on in economics today, but in a sense he wanted to somehow show those formal processes. But even there, and then it's interesting is as he finishes that book, then the Paris Commune breaks out, and he doesn't know what didn't work this way. We got this thing besides capital. It's called history.
It's pretty. I mean, it's a really strange first workers' revolt. I mean, because the German army invaded France, and then they just took over the defense of the city. Like it almost sounds nationalistic, but it was definitely didn't come like as part of what you would expect in terms of like the Marxist. Oh, the workers are all going to join together and form into a party. I'm a farmer.
Would you ever like to be a farmer?
If you can start the revolution.
Did you ever grow a garden?
Yeah, when I was younger. My
Okay.
parents.
Well, I grew a garden too. I even got my gardening heritage.
I didn't get a garden. Wasn't Boy Scouts, but I didn't get that merit badge.
Yeah. Well, I grew some real mean corn, by the way. But farming, gardening, agriculture, growing things is an art, right? I mean, there's a certain.
Okay, Carl, I have a question about the Jew.
You want to hear about my great grandmother?
I mean, another time. Can't think now. So this is a pretty basic question. My first real one all night. But so you said it makes intuitive sense to you that, and I read this, and you said this, and it still doesn't make.
It's April. It's time to put in the little tomato seedlings, and then especially here in Colorado, one comes a big frost and wipes it out, or something like that. That's aleatory. So depending on the plants you put in, some of them may survive, and some say revolution. I mean, in some ways, as Lenin himself was fond of saying, a revolutionary knows when to sow. When in some ways the czar,
He's kind of talking around the same stuff. So if the place, the locale for subjectivity is not like
the end of the war, which is, the whole state was coming out, but it was this sense of seizure, and
but no, okay, so I'm revealing my ignorance here. It's just a pretty basic question, but if the human person like the place of subjectivity, then where is he placing it?
What's the human person? Who are you? Do you mind me asking? You come from Rifle, Colorado, right? You know, you're I don't know that much about you. You know, I didn't know what cartoons you like to watch.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
What's your favorite cartoon?
It was clearly SpongeBob.
SpongeBob.
Yeah.
No, that's my grandkids' cartoon.
Okay, but like, I mean, like, even if
Well,
that's
no,
not,
we're just trying to, you know.
even if that's not like really like the spot, like right,
There are-
like apparatic, it floats around like subjectivity, intersubjectivity, derp, derp, derp. Like, if it's not like, if what you're saying, I is the only signifier of the we, like if it's not really in a, like I the placement is, or like where he's even going with that, or where you're going with that, for that matter. So.
Well, I mean, have you ever? Well, let's talk about trauma. We've been talking about this. Has anybody ever had traumatic moments in their life? I've told you my trauma of becoming a philosopher, right? You know, my eventful trauma that set me on this trajectory. You know, that I'm going to plant my seed, or like you remember that you know what was finally got me out of the trauma. It was sitting in a darkened movie theater watching Paul Newman's HUD, 1944. I do now, but there was a sudden break in the weather in the morning of June 6th, and he said go, and of course for us that was a fateful decision. That was in some way I'm pulling out of this, and it's interesting because then I went and talked to the youth pastor who is my girlfriend, both our youth pastors, or had been our youth pastor in high school. And he said, Carl, you got to live in history. Just got to go into. He actually said that, and so I entered history. The rest is history, or the philosophy of history, which is the same thing in that doing the same thing, and so forth. So I mean, if you're, I think there's a lot to this whole notion of scission. I mean, you're talking about, psychoanalysis next year, right?
It's on the table.
That sounds like scission to me. It's a lot.
It's kind of like when he was like, and then like everyone went crazy in Baltimore and burned down the CVS and whatever, Like, why did he say that? That was clearly like a positive, not positive as in good, but positive as in like doing something. Yeah.
But that's not what Badu is talking about. But even so, there's this kind of, well, they breaking the mold, or we have the urban riot phenomenon that's been going on. Well, goes way back before the '60s, except back in the '20s and '30s, it was white people destroying black neighborhoods. But it was that's not a venal. I mean, Badu talks a lot about that. He does mention the riot. And in some ways, the riot is more a symptomatology of the event, but it's not the event. Because within the event, there was always the seizure of action. In Baltimore was, it created a whole new discourse and a consciousness. The phrase now is starting to sink in, Black Lives Matter, and so forth. The question is whether that would have happened, without burning down Baltimore. The question, but I mean, it's like, so that's what we say, like the kind of the dramatic backdrop, to it all. That's the cymbal clash and the symphony, but the event is not the riot. Badu makes clear. He talks about riots. It's decision. It's decision that produces the decision, right? It's not that the decision doesn't produce the decision. It's the like that.
Is that the endorsement of psychoanalysis? Can I quote you on that?
Psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
But I understand that, but decision acts upon what? Doesn't there need to be something?
I mean, decision acts upon what?
decision.
Decision always has consequences, right?
Sure, but I'm talking about
I mean,
decision.
just for example, I made a decision to throw an apple core at you, totally unexpected, right?
Thanks.
That, I could have, I just was about 3 inches above your head. Yeah. And it permeated his book. Now, I probably
Mine
would,
too.
I probably would have injured you, but.
I don't know about that. It looked pretty hard. Looked like a good throw.
So, I mean, you didn't expect that, right? It had consequences.
I don't know.
In terms of your thinking. But I mean, seriously, I mean, that's a good example of what that dude's talking about, right? So, did that produce an effect we might just kind of dimly close subjectivization in you? Yeah,
Well,
good.
sure. What I want to know, or what I'm asking though, is what happens.
What happens before?
Before the decision.
Or
Not the
or the
decision.
cutting? Oh, yeah,
It's like there has to be.
I was doing apple core at you, that's what happened.
Right, but there has to be a flow before that, before you cut it off, and then to make a new decision.
It was totally out of the blue. It's just like, I mean, you raised your hand. I said,
I pointed to myself.
yeah, you did. Yeah, you asked for it, literally.
So does that have to do with the logic of the law of the unintended consequence?
Well, sir, but if you think about this whole no law unintended consequences isn't a law, right? It means that in a sense, the law of unintended consequences, basically the law is that, the law won't function properly. Like Murphy's law, if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong, and so forth, which is sort of a, statement of a law, but it implies a kind of lawless law. And, but that has nothing to do with decision. It has nothing to do with the event. That has in some ways a kind of prescription for the unpredictability or the incalculability, that is. So in other words, being is not calculable. Put it, in some kind of ontological, formulation. Yeah.
I think he's asking what causes decision.
Not even
No,
that.
what
What
is
does it
that?
act upon? Because if
What's
the
being cut?
decision happens first,
Decision, not the decision.
yes, if the decision acts or happens,
But it only
first,
acts first in terms of a retrospective narrative, okay? Because, it's like most of us decide on the spot. We don't really contemplate doing things, I mean, history is full of fateful decisions, right? The most famous or infamous is, Caesar deciding to cross the Rubicon. And, you can say, well, what were the antecedents to that decision? Or you can say, well, there's a process of reasoning, and so forth. Or you can say, in Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's decision to, break the pact with Stalin and invade Russia, which was planned to a certain extent, but it didn't turn out the way he expected.
Are those events?
Or an excess of force, or what can be called a force of excess, where the excess itself brings about destruction and that vanishing moment. There has to be that vanishing moment. That's what makes it eventful. Okay, I'm sorry, that was on page 256?
251.
251, okay. Well, since we're over in this section, let's look.
Actually, the last line of that, he says, it's in italics, to put into consistency the haste of the cause. And he says, therein lies the whole enigma of the subject.
Right. And the cause here, he's not talking about causality, he's talking about a cause like a political cause or so forth. Let's April 10th, 1978. This is a very interesting, and I think in many respects key, where he's really talking about the quality. He says the qualitative function of the supposed knucklehead. I like that. Of course, but there.
In other words, you're looking good tonight, Towie.
But the the rationality is both in some ways impossible and anticipated at the same time. So in other words, you can say, well, it had to have been that way. This is Leibniz's whole argument of the monadology. Well, it couldn't have been any other way. But of course, you don't see it that way until you've done it, so to speak. This is the best of all possible worlds. It includes an earthquake. But you don't, you can't say it's the best of all possible worlds until something which seems to violate the logic of the best of all possible worlds can now be justified at that higher level of rationality, which is, what he wrote the whole monadology about, so to speak. So I don't know if that answers your question and so forth, but I mean, again, you don't want to deal. There is no theory of antecedents. There's only a theory, in a sense. The theory of the subject is the theory of, you might say, the theory of incidence, or what he calls the inexistent. And what existent, I wanted to kind of hold off talking about that for next week. It's a key concept he introduces there at the end, because the inexistent is that which, in a sense, comes into existence because of decision. It's a sense to do that, a sense that talks about signification. It's probably now, if you think about it, let's get into Christian eschatology. Nobody knows when the Son of Man is coming about, because the Son of Man may come like a thief in the night. So there's this kind of unanticipatory eventful quality, I don't expect my girlfriend to dump me unexpectedly, but but she does, and therefore does have become a philosopher. 1 and 2. It's not thesis, antithesis in a Hegelian sense. Here's the one thing I wanted to say, that in some ways we have, operating within contemporary thought, 3 dialectics. There is the Hegelian dialectic, which is the dialectic of contradiction, which Marx makes a lot out of. But then along comes Deleuze, he writes his book on Nietzsche, which forms a kind of for Badiou to develop his ideas, which he calls his book on Nietzsche, says it's against the dialectic, because it's a dialectic of difference. For Deleuze, what drives things, what drives events is differences. He talks about desiring machines, but desiring machines are also differential machines. And he's fascinated with the whole notion of the differential calculus and differential logic, hence his book on Leibniz and the Baroque and the Fold and so forth. But so that's what you might call a non-contradictory dialectic based on difference. That I think when you have in Badiou, that scission is not the same as difference. Scission is different, that in some words becomes this difference, it becomes decisive. You heard the phrase, it's not just a difference, but a difference that makes a difference and so forth. But what makes a difference is that we bring our decision into the process. Because everything is so obviously stupid and simple as a budget, Decision, it's a break with everything, it's not just different, it's a scission that now enables a decision. Yes.
May perhaps argue that this then represents a dialectic of dialect.
And you said, oh my God, like I overspent. I just got a notice from the bank that I'm overdrawn. How did that happen? And sort of thing. So you have to decide, you have to act, So in some ways you're not reacting, you are acting upon, and you say, well, I'll have to change this budget. I do keep a budget. I do it all the time. I do it
Excel spreadsheets once a month. A program that's in my back, the logic of contradiction. It has to do with exchange.
Right.
You know, and so in intersubjectivity, dialectics means lexane or legane, from which we get logos, which is a sense of back and forth. So yeah, so I mean, all of these in some ways show that, you know, there are the moment of concrete realization we call expenditure may be excess. You know, it may be that we got an unexpected windfall, or we in a sense overspent. But it's that constant instantiation of excess that makes the formalization without, you know, indifference and repetition, in the sense that the repetition is in itself a different. But what does Badiou say about repetition? Look at that. He said that
Have you already abandoned your new tablet device?
you know what? I think I'm going to take it back. It's too slow. Is it recording? Let me see if I can- Oh, he said event is something beyond repetition. So, in some words, even though Deleuze talks about event and Foucault calls him the theoretician of the event. The event for Deleuze is in many ways, I think, if you want to read Deleuze carefully, it's about pure difference. But event for something is not pure difference. Difference has nothing to do with event for Badiou. Event and a break that in a sense puts everything else in a different kind of perspective. You know, I mean, you can there is no logic of the event in an immanent sense, but there is a logic of the event in retrospect, and that is
akin to Paul on the road to Damascus, where it seemingly comes.
Is Derridian dialectic the same as Deleuzian?
I don't think there's a dialectic at all in Derrida. Yes, I mean, I think there's I think there's deconstruction is not dialectic. Deconstruction is something that goes on with text and the reading of text and so forth. But Deleuze, I don't think Derrida really has a theory of the subject, which is, you know, I mean, I think the theory of the subject can make use of deconstruction as a philosophical methodology, but I don't think there is any theory of the subject. I mean, because I think difference always has to do with the act of signification. All right, well, see, it's almost time here. So anybody have any questions about this tonight? We'll continue. I think next week we'll spend maybe an hour here, and then we'll adjourn to the site of difference. Or the site of this place.
Yeah.
It's Vegas.
You are.
Finals recording. Yeah.
More procrastination.
More.
Christ.
But doesn't the event require a response from him? Like, couldn't he have experienced all those things? Isn't there some
Well,
decision
I
that
think
needs
if you're
to be
going to
made?
understand Badiou, though, you've got to get away from the